WTH is an HOA. Is it, as one meme suggests, a bunch of Karens? Or as a reply suggests, the only 5 people in a community who do any of the work? There are huge opinions on both sides, and we're here to talk about some of the facts involved and what you need to know as a home buyer or seller and how an HOA is going to affect that process. I'm Ruth Sheehan.
And I'm Danielle Tully.
And we're putting the real in real estate. So Danielle, you have an HOA where you live, and I have one where I live.
Yes.
And they're different, and there are different types of HOAs. There's also just differences in the way they operate. For instance, there's an HOA in Brookdale in Naperville that's like, I don't know, $50 for the year or something ridiculous. But that's just to put on a few social events and put out a newsletter. So that's all they do. They don't have rules for what you can do on the outside of your house. They don't have, responsibilities for taking care of things. It's just a social group that everybody who wants to contributes to. It's also completely voluntary. My HOA is by no means voluntary. It's part of how the community was set up. And when you have shared property, somebody has to manage it. And there has to be oversight, and there has to be budget, and there has to be someone to do the work. Now, a lot of people think that that management company that gets hired is who does the work. They do some of it, but the board has its own job in the whole process that's very important. And the board is simply made up of volunteer homeowners.
So it's interesting that you say that, because my neighborhood, not only does it have an HOA, but some of the homes, depending on what they are. So my home, my neighborhood is made up mostly of single family homes. There are some duplexes, which are still individually owned on each side. And then there are townhouses. Now the townhouses are actually part of 2 different associations, because there is the common areas, the clubhouses, the pools, and other community amenities that are covered for the one lower rate one that everybody in the community has to pay for. And then there's the townhouses, which has extra things. They do the plowing, they do the cutting of the grass, some of the maintenance on the outside, landscaping and things like that. So theirs is a higher fee, just because, again, how that's set up. And you were talking about the management company, or voluntary. Ours is not voluntary, but most of the time that's because the builders put that in place. That's how the builders decided that they wanted things to be managed. They were putting in extra spaces that were going to be for the community. And the only way to do that is kind of another governmental entity, if you will,
right,
of that community.
Yeah. So the builder usually sets up the HOA. They run it while they're still building, and then that gets handed over to the homeowners upon completion of the entire community. Right. And they all have a group of 2 groups, actually, of rules that dictate how the community functions. There are rules and regulations, and those are the rules for the homeowners that must be followed. They are rules that you agree to when you purchase, and there can be repercussions for not following those rules. Then there's the bylaws, which dictate primarily how the board functions and how the association functions. There are a few differences in the ways those are set up, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but there's a couple of things that are really important to know ahead of time. The main thing is this a condo HOA board, or is it a fee simple with an HOA? So fee simple usually means townhomes, but it can also mean single family or duplex, as Danielle said. Fee simple means that the owner owns that structure. They have more property ownership than condos typically do.
Yes.
A condo, most of the time, is a single building that's divided up, and owners own their unit, and that's referred to as walls in, which is pretty apparent what that means. Townhomes often own the outside of their own unit as well as the inside, and maybe a little bit of land to go along with it. So that affects things like you don't need a survey when you have a condo because there's no land to survey. Condo maintenance typically includes all of the outside of the building and some of the common features on the inside, like HVAC systems. Not necessarily now, because some have their own individual ones and units, but oftentimes it's HVAC, it's elevators, it's parking garages. It is the brick, the roof, sometimes even the windows, and doors. Those fees, and sometimes even some utilities are included. So those fees are going to be higher because they include a lot more. Their budgets are much higher. There's a lot more that the association is responsible for paying for.
Correct.
And then, as Danielle mentioned, sometimes there's some sort of common space that gets maintained that costs money.
Parking lots or
parking lots. We both have pools in our community. So the more bills there are, the higher the association dues are. And probably that's where a lot of animosity comes. People feel that, they don't like when their assessments go up. They say, well, when I bought it, it was this, and now it's this. Your mortgage is likely not to go up unless you've got products that don't exist anymore. But your assessments will, because guess what? All of those bills go up. So
yeah, and that's why I was saying I like to tell people it's another level of governance. It's another level. So when, you're talking about your mortgage not going up, well, mortgages do go up, but it's not the interest and principal per se, as much as it's the taxes that are associated and the insurance that's associated. And so if you think about your taxes that are going to the schools and the county and the city and the this and the that, their expenses get higher because there's certain things that they're maintaining. They're maintaining streets, and they're maintaining, the community parks, the city parks or the township parks, and you have more layers. So that's where those fees are. And it's volunteers.
Yeah.
I think that's something. Also, they're not out there to make a whole bunch of money on you. They are
not personally making any money on you. They're doing the opposite. They're working for free to help maintain your property. And the key is they're volunteer homeowners. So that means whatever that fee is, they are also paying it. Believe me, the likelihood that they are just willy-nilly raising association dues is not probable. And by the way, I do have to give the disclaimer. I sit on the board of my association and have for the last several years. So I have that other perspective of being both inside and outside the board. And, it's really probably the biggest disappointment in anything that most people ever volunteer for is to find that those people who don't volunteer, who don't help, are typically the ones who have the longest list of complaints about those that do. So if you hear an edge in my voice during this broadcast, this is the putting the reel in side of it. So Danielle is not on her board, but she works closely with them and spends a lot of time because it helps us.
Yeah.
The more we know about our communities, the better we do our jobs.
I attend mine as often as I can. I did it every single month prior to COVID, and they've changed when they do it and how often, and now they're just getting back into in person. So I've only been to a handful, but that's helped me as an agent, right, to know what's going on in the neighborhood, and it helps me know the health of my neighborhood. So when I am, selling the house, physically selling the houses, but also just word of mouth selling the houses in my neighborhood and trying to tell other realtors that it's a great value and it's a great community, it's because I'm there, month after month or every other month now, getting the insides and outs and knowing kind of the good and the bad, and able to, make a different, explain how it might work. And then also it's being aware of what's going on with an HOA, not necessarily just my neighborhood, but one of the things that you want to be aware of is, you were just talking about raising the rates. When you're buying in an HOA, because Ruth and I have experience with HOAs, we kind of have a good idea of what to ask about. How often is it raised? Is an astronomical price? There's some HOAs that I've looked at, I'm like, what is going on? They've had to put a special assessment because of some major thing that happened with the pool. There's no reserves.
That should have been anticipated. That should have been, they should have been saving toward that. So you want to make sure that whoever is on the board understands their role and understands that the management of that money, short-term and long-term, is their job. And that can be quite difficult because, again, these are people who are just volunteering in their spare time. So sometimes the people who do that don't really, have the skills to do that, the forecast and budget. We have, for the past several years, hired a company to audit and do a reserve report and do a lot of that long-term maintenance planning that, the average homeowner, by the way, the average homeowner buys in an HOA community because they may not want to do all of that work. So, so that can be a danger. And we try to make sure that we know as much as we can when we're especially working with a buyer. When we're working with sellers, we have a little bit more of an affordability of time. So we call the HOAs. They don't necessarily like to answer our questions, but we call them to find out everything we can about what the rules are, how they might impact a future buyer, what qualifies. For instance, you cannot buy in a condo community with an FHA loan if that condo community does not have a specific approval from HUD. So if we don't have that information, we can't help our FHA buyers with it. I'm dealing with that right now. So I think there is kind of a lot to it. You need to make sure that the agents you're working with, and your lender and your attorney are all very much on finding out what the specifics of that HOA are before you buy. And then if you find out after you buy that you don't think the place is as well run as you think it ought to be, well, guess what? There's a remedy for that too. What is that, Danielle?
Did we say what a HOA stands for? For acronym happy here, but HOA is Homeowners Associations, which means the homeowners are who represent the Homeowners Association. So you are now a homeowner. So welcome.
So go to the meetings at the very, very least, participate in them, participate in the solutions. Don't be there to voice your complaints. And the ultimate participation in the solution is to join the board. So you can run, they have elections on a regular basis. You can find out when those are. You can run, you can, encourage your neighbors to vote for you, and you can then be the ultimate part of the solution from the inside.
And the only last thing I want, which is really great, but this is getting a little outside of what we were just talking about, but it is important also when figuring out if there's an HOA and how much that is and how often, because it could be annually, it could be monthly, it could be quarterly paid. Those prices, that amount also goes into your potential mortgage. So we've talked many times about knowing what the taxes are and the interest rate and how much your borrowing and your insurance. And this is yet another piece of that whole pie that you and your lender are going to have to determine, because my neighborhood, it's $36 a month. Most people, it's not going to make or break their budget. But in a condo association where we were talking about all the maintenance and they are, saving for a new, put new roof on and all that other stuff, that's often several $100s. And as you can imagine, several $100s every month definitely takes impacts the
it affects your home buying budget. Yeah.
Correct. So it's not necessarily bad, because again, you're going to have to put a new roof on your home if you own it long enough. You are going to have maintenance outside. So it's just, you're kind of agreeing to that up front, opposed to, figuring that out on your own.
Also, let me tell you, you have to find out what exactly is included in the ownership and in the maintenance by the HOA. In my particular townhome community, it's very unusual, but we own the outsides of our buildings and we are responsible for our own roofs, even when they're connected to another roof. We're responsible for our own siding, even though it's all connected. So people who come into it not finding that out and not knowing about it, or not believing me when I tell them about it, are at a big disadvantage. So you need to know what's included in those fees. What does it get? What does it pay for? And what else might you need to pony up for when the time comes?
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, within my neighborhood, the duplexes, you have to, even though it's connected, you are responsible for your own. So they might know that, oh, look at the townhouses are getting roofs. Clearly I'm connected. Ours is covered. And that is not the case. So it is, a neighborhood by neighborhood. So again,
don't assume that the sidewalks are part of the HOA's responsibility. Yep. Don't assume that the driveways are part of it. It is all individual. And it's all, again, based on that builder setup that happened a long time ago. So we will see you next week.
Yes, where we're going to do another acronym. We've realized how many acronyms. So we're going to do a series on acronyms. And Ruth used a couple, I'm going to say, that I had to write down. She talked about HUD, HUD, and she said FHA. And so we're going to try to help you guys understand the terminology in real estate. So next week, I can't remember what we're doing, but it will be another acronym. And it's an
WTH is something or other.
Yes, exactly. You'll find out, and we'll find out, and we'll let you know.
We'll find out. We have a list.
All right. See you next Friday.